My brother told me I'd never amount to anything without the family business, so I bought its biggest competitor. Ben had always been my dad's favorite, the heir to Miller Construction, which our grandfather had built from scratch. While I was getting my MBA, Ben was learning to operate excavators and charm customers at company barbecues. When my father had a heart attack last year, Ben stepped into the CEO chair like he was born to it. At the memorial reception, while I was still reeling from my father's death, Ben cornered me in the kitchen. "Look, Amy," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I know you think you deserve some of this, but the facts are the facts. You have your fancy business degree and your nice office job downtown, but you don't understand construction. You're not going to make it without the support of the family business." He was wrong about one thing. I knew more about construction than he thought. For 3 years, I had been quietly consulting for Wilson Industries, Miller Construction's biggest competitor. What started as a side gig helping them streamline their operations turned into something more. I learned their processes, their profit margins, the complaints customers had about companies like ours. More importantly, I learned that they were struggling financially. 6 months after my father's funeral, I liquidated my entire investment and took out the biggest loan the bank would approve. Wilson Industries was losing money because of the lawsuit, and their board was desperate. I bought them for 60 cents on the dollar. The first person I called was our largest client, Park Development. I could tell they were frustrated with Ben's sloppy project management in his father's final months. "Amy Miller," I said when the CEO answered, "I think we can solve your deadline problems." Within 2 weeks, Wilson had won 3 big contracts that Miller Construction had been counting on. Ben called me, screaming, "What the hell are you doing?" "Business," I said calmly. "What you think I'll never understand." The bidding war between our companies lasted 8 months. For every bid Miller submitted, Wilson submitted a better one. We hired their best project managers. We finished ahead of schedule and under budget, while Ben's crews fell behind schedule. The final blow came when Park Development offered us an exclusive 5-year, $12 million contract. It was the contract Ben had counted on to keep Miller Construction afloat. That night, Ben showed up at my apartment, exhausted. "You're tearing down everything Dad built." "No," I corrected. "I'm finishing what he started. He always said business is an evolution. Survival of the fittest." Last week, Miller Construction filed for bankruptcy. Today, I'm sitting in what used to be Ben's office, reading the acquisition papers that will officially merge his company with mine. But there's something Ben doesn't know yet. Something I discovered in my father's old files that changes everything about why he actually left me out of his will. The cardboard folder was hidden behind my father's old file cabinet, pushed so far back that the janitorial service hadn't noticed it for over a year. I only found it when I personally went through his office before the demolition crew arrived to gut the building. The folder was labeled "Legal Personal" in my father's familiar handwriting. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. DNA test results, dated 3 weeks before my father died. According to the lab report, there was a 99.7% chance that Ben was not my father's biological son. I stared at the papers for a full minute, my hands shaking. Below the DNA results was a letter from a private investigator named Donovan Cross, detailing a 6-month investigation into his mother's affair with his father's former business partner, Ricardo Valencia. The affair had lasted 2 years. It had started when Ben was conceived, but that wasn't the damnedest part. Attached to the investigator's report was a copy of a contract between Ricardo and a competitor called Hartwell Industries. The contract was dated 4 years earlier, right around the time Miller Construction began losing big bids to Hartwell. Ricardo had been passing inside information to Hartwell. Our bid amounts, our project deadlines, even our customer complaints. For 4 years, Ben's biological father had been sabotaging the company that had raised his son, and Ben had no idea. The last document in the folder was a handwritten letter from my father to his lawyer. Never sent. "Harold, I can't leave the company to a son who isn't mine, especially when his real father is destroying everything I built. But I can't tell Ben the truth either. It would hurt him to know that his background and his entire career were a lie. Leave it to Amy. She's the only one I can trust to protect what our family has truly built. If Ben contests the will, give him this folder. Let him understand why." Robert I sat in that empty office for 3 hours, reading and rereading the documents. It all made sense now. My father's distance from Ben in those last months. his insistence on including me in more client meetings. The way he looked at Ben at that last Christmas dinner was like he was seeing a stranger. But my dad died before he could send the letter to his lawyer. The will he'd written 2 years earlier stood, leaving everything to Ben. The lawyer never knew about the file or my dad's mood swings. My phone buzzed. A text from Ben. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important." I looked at the DNA results again. Ben had lost everything based on a lie he didn't even realize he'd told. For a moment, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered his smug face at my dad's funeral, telling me I was getting nowhere. I texted back, "My office. In an hour." When Ben arrived, he looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His expensive suit was wrinkled. The golden boy was quickly fading. "I don't understand how this happened," he said, sinking into the chair across from my desk. "I did everything right." I followed my father's plan. "Exactly." "Maybe that was the problem," I said carefully. He looked up at me, his lids red. "I need to ask you something, and I need your honesty." My stomach clenched. "What? Did my father ever tell you anything about me? About whether he thought I was capable?" I studied his face. "What makes you ask?" Ben pulled out his phone and showed me the video. I found this on my father's old computer when I was cleaning out his home office. It's dated 2 weeks before he died. I pressed play. My father's face appeared on the screen, tired but determined. He was sitting in his home office, the one with the built-in bookshelves that Mom had always been so proud of. "Amy," my father's voice said through the speakerphone, "if you're watching this, it means I didn't get around to fixing things before I died. There's something you need to know about Ben, about our family, about why I couldn't leave him company." My blood ran cold. "I know you're probably mad that I left everything to your brother and not you, but I need you to understand. I was trying to protect you from the truth that would have destroyed everything we knew about our family." Ben watched my face carefully. "He mentioned you by name, Amy. That message was meant for you, not me. But I found it first. In the video," my father continued, "check behind the filing cabinet in my office. There's a folder there that explains everything. You'll understand why I couldn't tell you while I was alive, and why I want you to decide what to do with the truth." The video ended. Ben put the phone down. "I've looked everywhere for that folder. In his office, in his home office, even in his car. Nothing. Do you know what he was talking about?" I could feel the cardboard folder burning in my desk drawer, like it was radioactive. Ben had come here broken and defeated, asking for help to understand why his world had fallen apart. The truth would destroy him completely, but it would also explain why he deserved everything that had happened to him. "Ben," I said slowly, "what would you do if you found out that everything you believed about your life was a lie?" His laugh was bitter. "After losing the company, I think that ship has sailed. I mean everything. Your relationship with your father, your place in the family, your right to inherit the business." Something in his expression changed. "Amy, do you know something I don't?" I opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. "I found this 3 days ago," I said, passing it across the desk. "Dad hid it behind the filing cabinet." Then I opened the folder. I watched his face go through a series of changes as he read. Confusion, then shock, then pain so deep it was almost physically painful to see. When he finished reading, he set the papers down very carefully, as if they might explode. "Ricardo Valencia," he said quietly. "He was at Dad's funeral." He was. He came down the receiving line, told me how sorry he was for my loss, how Dad was like a brother to him. Ben's voice was empty. He called me his son. The irony struck us both at once. Ben held up the DNA results again. So Dad knew. He knew for months that I wasn't his biological son, and that my real father was sabotaging the company. "Ben and you," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "You destroyed Miller Construction without knowing it. You beat me fair and square. I hadn't expected that reaction. I wish I'd known." "No." Ben stood up abruptly. "Don't apologize. You did exactly what Dad would have wanted you to do. You protected the family legacy by taking it from someone who had no right to it. He walked over to the window that overlooked the construction site below. Crews were already repainting the Miller construction signs so they read Wilson Miller Industries. There's something else, he said without turning around. The night before my dad died, he called me into his office. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "I hope one day you realize that I loved you enough to lie to you my whole life." I thought he was just being emotional about the state of his heart. Ben turned to me. He was trying to tell me, wasn't he? I nodded. All those times growing up, people saying I looked more like my mom's family. All those jokes about me being the milkman's kid and the look on my dad's face whenever someone made those comments. Ben sat back in his chair. Oh God, how did I not see that? Because you weren't supposed to see that, I said. Your father went to great lengths to protect you from the truth, even if it meant leaving the company to someone else. He left the company to someone who deserved it. His letter said he couldn't trust the business to someone whose biological father was actively trying to destroy it. Ben was silent for a few minutes, taking it all in. Finally, he looked up at me. I need to ask you something, and I need your complete honesty, okay? If you had known all this from the start, about Ricardo, about the DNA results, about your father's true wishes, would you have handled it differently? I thought carefully. I would have told you the truth from the start, but I would still have fought for the company. Not out of revenge, but because father was right. I was the one who understood the business well enough to save it. Ben nodded slowly. That's what I thought you'd say. He gathered the papers from the folder. Can I have them? Of course. They're about your life. Our lives, I corrected. That includes you. If Ricardo ruined father's business out of some twisted revenge for being cut out of Ben's life, then he's damaged your inheritance as well as mine. I hadn't thought of it that way. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I think the first thing I need to do is talk to Ricardo Valencia. Ben stood to leave, then paused at the door. Amy, I have to apologize. Not just for what I said at the funeral, but for 28 years of treating you like you didn't belong in this family. You were always the real daughter, and I was too arrogant to see that. After he left, I was alone in the office that had once been his, trying to process what had happened. In an hour, everything had changed again. Ben was no longer the golden boy heir, but he was also not the enemy I had spent months fighting. And somewhere out there was Ricardo Valencia, the man who had spent 4 years systematically destroying the company that had raised his biological son. My phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Amy Miller, I answered. Ms. Miller, this is Detective Patricia Hayes with the Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you recently acquired Miller Construction through bankruptcy. My blood ran cold. Yes, that's right. We're investigating a pattern of bid rigging and industrial espionage that may affect your former family business. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon? I glanced at the DNA results still scattered across my desk. Detective Hayes, I think I have information that will be very relevant to your investigation. What information? One that explains how Miller Construction's competitors always seem to know exactly what bids to submit. There was a pause. Miss Miller, are you saying you have evidence of corporate espionage? I picked up the investigator's report on Ricardo's contract with Hartwell Industries. I'm saying I have evidence of a 4-year conspiracy to destroy my family's business, and I think the person responsible just made a very big mistake. What mistake? He showed up at my father's funeral and called the victim his son. I could almost hear Detective Hayes straighten up. Can you be here in an hour? I'll be there in 30 minutes. The police station was a stark contrast to the wood-paneled elegance of Miller Construction. Detective Hayes was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen every possible variation of corporate greed. Let me make sure I understand you correctly, she said after I told her about the documents. Your father discovered that his son was not his biological son, and that the boy's real father had been leaking information to competitors for 4 years. Exactly. And my father died before he could act on that information. But you knew none of that when you acquired Wilson Industries and drove Miller Construction into bankruptcy. I had no idea. I thought I was just competing with my brother for control of the family legacy. Detective Hayes studied the investigator's report. This Ricardo Valencia, He was a business partner of your father's 15 years ago. According to this, yes. He left the company around the time my brother was born, and now he's involved with Hartwell Industries, which is Miller Construction's biggest competitor. I nodded. The timing can't be a coincidence. I'm going to have to get the FBI involved. If Valencia is colluding in bids at multiple companies over 4 years, that's way beyond local jurisdiction. 3 hours later, I sat in a conference room with Detective Hayes, FBI, Agent Colton Ross, and U.S. Attorney Diana Thorne. They spread the contents of their father's file across the large table like puzzle pieces. Ms. Miller, Agent Ross said, we've been investigating Hartwell Industries for bid rigging for 6 months. We knew they had inside information, but we couldn't figure out how they were getting it. Your father's investigation fills in all the missing pieces. Prosecutor Thorne leaned forward. The question now is, are you willing to help us build a case against Valencia and Hartwell? What would that mean? We need you to approach Valencia as Amy Miller, the concerned sister trying to figure out what happened to the family business. If you could get him to admit to industrial espionage, we'd have a case to bring. I thought of Ben, probably driving around, trying to figure out how to process the revelation that his entire life had been built on a lie. What about my brother? He's Valencia's biological son. That actually complicates this, Agent Ross admitted. Valencia could argue that any information he passed on was obtained legally through his son's access to company files. Only Ben had no idea what was going on. He was being used. We need to prove it. And the only way to do that definitively is to get Valencia to admit that he manipulated his son without his knowledge. Detective Hayes pulled out a small device about the size of a smartphone. We'd hook you up for a conversation. Valencia thinks he's won. His son's company is going bankrupt, and he probably assumes that all the evidence of his sabotage went with it. He may be confident enough to brag about what he's accomplished. I stared at the recording device. It could completely destroy Ben when he finds out that his biological father manipulated him his entire life, used him to destroy the only family he's ever known. Mr. Ben Miller is the victim in this case, Attorney Thorne said firmly. Valencia committed fraud, industrial espionage, and conspiracy. Your brother was used without his knowledge as a weapon against his own family. When do I need to do this? Agent Ross checked his watch. Valencia is attending a construction industry party at the Riverside Hotel tonight. Our intel suggests he regularly attends such events to network and gather information. If you approach him there, it will seem natural. I thought of my father's last letter, his desire to protect Ben from the truth that would destroy him. But Ben already knew the truth. Now the question was whether we could get justice for what Valencia had done to our family. I will, I said. The balcony of the Riverside Hotel was filled with everyone who mattered in the construction industry. I immediately spotted Ricardo Valencia. He stood out not just because of his expensive suit, but because of the way he carried himself, like a man who had won a very long game. He held court near the bar, surrounded by Hartwell Industries executives laughing about something. I watched him for a few minutes, noting the way he gestured when he spoke, the way he made eye contact. This was the man who had slept with my mother, my brother's father, and then spent 4 years systematically destroying everything my family had built. I came up to his left side, timing it so that he would see me as soon as he finished his drink. Ricardo Valencia, I said, extending my hand. Amy Miller, I believe you knew my father. His face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, and something that might have been amusement. Amy Miller, he repeated, shaking my hand. Robert's daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. Thank you. I was hoping I could talk to you alone. I'm trying to sort out some things about the family business. Ricardo glanced at his companions. Gentlemen, could you give me a moment? He led me to a quieter corner of the ballroom. How can I help you? I allowed my voice to be vulnerable enough to be persuasive. I'm sure you heard about what happened between Ben and me. The company, the bankruptcy. I heard something about that. Family feuds can be devastating in a family business. Exactly. I can't shake the feeling that there was something else. Miller Construction was doing well until about 4 years ago. And then all of a sudden we started losing every major bid to the same handful of competitors. Ricardo's eyes widened with interest. Construction is a competitive industry. Sometimes companies just go through tough times. But this wasn't a tough period. It was systematic, like someone knew exactly what we were bidding on every project. That would be industrial espionage, Ricardo said carefully. Very serious charges. I took a deep breath, remembering Agent Ross's instructions. Ricardo, can I ask you something personal? My mother mentioned that you and Dad were close friends years ago. What happened to your friendship? For the first time, Ricardo's composure wavered slightly. Business partnerships don't always work out. Your father and I had different visions for the company. Is that why you left right after Ben was born? The question hit the mark. Ricardo froze. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm just trying to figure out why Miller Construction's problems started around the same time you went into business with Hartwell Industries. Ricardo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're very perceptive. Much more so than your brother. The words sent a chill through me. What do you mean? Ben's a nice guy, but he's not particularly observant. That made things easier. What made it easier? Ricardo seemed to realize he'd said too much. He started to turn away, but I caught his arm. Ricardo, please. I just want to understand what happened to my family's company. He looked at me for a long moment, then looked around to make sure no one was listening. Do you want to know what happened? Your father thought he could cut me out of the business I helped him build just because he found out about my relationship with your mother, but Robert forgot that loyalty is mutual. My heart was pounding so hard I'm sure he could hear it. What kind of loyalty? Ben may not have known it, but he kept me informed about every aspect of Miller Construction. Family dinners, casual conversations about upcoming bids, complaints about project deadlines. He was a great source of information. You used your own son to spy on Miller Construction. Ricardo's smile was cold. I used my son to take back what was rightfully mine. Your father stole the fruits of my life and tried to erase me from the family I helped create. I simply returned the favor for 4 years. The time it took to watch Robert Miller lose everything he thought made him better than me. I was disgusted. Ben had no idea what you were doing. Of course not. Ben thought his dear old dad's ex-partner was just being friendly about his career. He was enthusiastically sharing the details of the family business with someone who knew about construction. You destroyed your own son's legacy. Ricardo shrugged. Ben will be fine. He's young. He can recover. But Robert Miller died knowing that everything he tried to protect from me was being destroyed by his own son. Except Ben isn't his son, I said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. Ricardo's face went white. What did you say? I said Ben wasn't Dad's biological son. The DNA tests confirmed it. Dad knew for months before he died that Ben was your child, not his. Ricardo staggered slightly, clutching the back of the nearest chair. It's impossible. Robert never suspected. Dad hired a private investigator. He found out about your affair with Mom, about Ben's paternity, and about your contract with Hartwell Industries. He knew everything. I watched Ricardo process this information, seeing the moment he realized what it meant. If Robert knew Ben wasn't his son, then why had he left him the company? He didn't. Dad's real plan was to leave everything to me and tell Ben the truth about his paternity. But Dad died before he could update his will. Ricardo looked at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. You're telling me I spent 4 years destroying a company that would never belong to my son? I'm telling you, you spent 4 years manipulating your own child to get revenge on a man who was already planning to cut your son out of his inheritance. The color drained completely from Ricardo's face. But Ben doesn't know any of this. He does now. I showed him the DNA results in Dad's investigation this morning. Ricardo sank into the chair he'd been holding on to. What did he say? He said he understood why Dad couldn't trust him with the company, since his biological father had sabotaged it for years. Ricardo just sat there for a few seconds, the weight of his actions settling on him. Then he looked at me with something like despair. I never wanted Ben to get hurt. I was mad at your father, not at him. But you hurt him anyway. You used him to destroy the only family he'd ever known, and then you let him blame himself when it all fell apart. Ricardo buried his face in his hands. I thought I was protecting him. I thought if Miller Construction failed, it would prove that Robert never deserved what he had. Instead, you proved that Ben never deserved what happened to him. I watched Ricardo's composure crumble completely. 4 years of calculated revenge crumbling under the weight of unintended consequences. Amy, he said quietly. What now? Now you're going to tell the truth about what you did. Everything. And if I don't? I thought of the recording device taped to my ribs, of Agent Ross listening from the van in the hotel parking lot, of the federal prosecutor who was building a case that could send Ricardo to prison for decades. Then you'll explain it to a jury, not your son. Ricardo was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. I want to talk to Ben, he said. I need to explain to him that none of this was his fault. It's not up to me. But Ricardo, before you do anything else, you need to understand something. What you did wasn't just revenge. It was fraud, conspiracy, and industrial espionage. There will be consequences beyond losing Ben's respect. What kind of consequences? Before I could answer, Ben appeared over my shoulder. He must have been watching from across the room. The ones that involve federal charges, Ben said quietly. Ricardo looked at his biological son, and for a moment, the family resemblance was unmistakable. They had the same eyes, the same stubborn set of their jaws. Ben, Ricardo said, standing slowly. I need to explain. You need to come clean, Ben interrupted. To Amy, to the FBI, and to every contractor whose livelihood you destroyed with your bid-rigging scheme. You called the FBI. I nodded. This afternoon, after I found Dad's investigation into your activities. Ricardo looked from Ben to me and back to Ben. The two of you planned this. No, Ben said. We just both decided that the truth was more important than protecting someone who had lied to everyone for 4 years. Agent Ross appeared at the edge of our conversation, followed by 2 other federal agents. They moved smoothly through the crowd, attracting very little attention. Mr. Valencia, Agent Ross said quietly, we'd like you to come with us to answer some questions. Ricardo didn't resist as they led him away, but just before they reached the exit, he turned to look at Ben. I'm sorry, he shouted. I'm sorry about all of this. Ben watched his biological father disappear through the hotel doors, then turned to me. How much of it did they record? All of it. He admitted to using you to gather information, coordinating with Hartwell Industries, and systematically sabotaging Miller Construction over 4 years. Okay, Ben said. He needed to pay for what he did to Dad. We stood in the middle of a construction industry meeting, surrounded by people who had watched our family's business empire crumble in the past year. Some of them stared, noticing the federal agents. Others pretended not to see anything. Ben, I said, what's between us now? I mean, he thought for a moment. I don't know. 6 months ago, I would have said we were enemies. This morning, I would have said we were strangers. But right now, I think we really might be brother and sister. We've always been brother and sister. Yes, but I was too stupid to realize it. I glanced around the ballroom at the faces of the contractors and architects and developers who had either benefited from Ricardo's scheme or suffered from it. There's something else we need to talk about. What? I asked. Wilson Miller Industries is going to be worth a lot more than Miller Construction ever was. And legally, you're still Daddy's son, regardless of biology. You raised him. He raised you. And that's more important than DNA. Ben shook his head. Amy, I can't accept. I'm not offering you a handout. I'm offering you a job. Wilson Miller Industries needs someone who understands the legacy we're trying to preserve. Someone who knows which customers were dear to Dad and which were just checks. You want me to work for you? I want us to work together, to build something that honors what Dad really wanted, not what his will accidentally created. Ben extended his hand. Partners. I shook it. Partners. Within 6 months, Wilson Miller Industries was the largest construction company in the state. We'd hired back most of the skilled workers who'd lost their jobs when Miller Construction went bankrupt. We filled all the outstanding contracts that Ben had failed to complete and completely restructured our bid process to prevent the leaks that had destroyed the original company. Ricardo Valencia pleaded guilty to industrial espionage, conspiracy, and fraud. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to every company harmed by his bid-rigging scheme. Hartwell Industries lost its construction license and was completely liquidated. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the business success. It was the look on Ben's face when we broke ground on our first big project together. A low-income housing complex that Dad had always wanted to build, but never had the capital to finance. Ben had designed the project management schedule. I had secured the financing and permits, and we both insisted on hiring local workers whenever possible, just as Dad would have. At the groundbreaking, Ben pulled me aside. "I found something else in Dad's papers," he said, handing me a small envelope. It was tucked inside his copy of the original corporate incorporation papers. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of Dad holding a baby. Me at 6 months old, already trying to fix everything around me. This one's going to save the world one day. Below that, in different ink, was a line that had clearly been added later. She saved me instead. I looked up at Ben, whose eyes were suspiciously bright. "He knew," I said. "Even when you were the golden boy, even when he was grooming you to take over, he knew I was the one who would truly protect the company." "Yes," Ben said, "but he also knew you'd need my help to do it right." I thought about it as we watched the excavators begin work on the housing complex. Dad had been playing a longer game than any of us realized. He'd left the company to Ben knowing I would fight for it, knowing the truth about Ricardo would eventually come out, and knowing that Ben and I would be stronger together than either of us could ever be alone. "He was still manipulating us from beyond the grave," I said. Ben laughed. "Yes, but this time it had worked." A year later, Ben and I stood in the completed community center of our apartment complex, watching the kids play on the playground we'd built to Dad's exact specifications, from plans we'd found in his desk drawer. Plans he'd drawn up 20 years earlier but never had the chance to implement. "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Dad had lived long enough to tell you the truth himself?" I asked. Ben considered the question. "I think about it sometimes, but honestly, I'm glad it happened this way." "Really?" "If Dad had just handed me a DNA test and told me that Ricardo was my biological father, I'd probably be too hurt and angry to think clearly. I might have made different choices. Like choosing Ricardo's version of the truth over yours. It was like Dad had betrayed me instead of realizing that Ricardo had betrayed all of us." I watched as a little girl climbed to the top of a play structure and waved at her mother. The playground was full of families who lived in affordable housing because Ben and I had learned to trust each other. "Ben," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you ever wish that Ricardo had been a better father? That he'd chosen to be a part of your life honestly instead of using you for revenge?" Ben was silent for a long time, watching the children play. "I used to think about that," he said finally, "but I realized that wishing for a different father was like wishing for a completely different life. And I like the life I got. Even if it meant losing the family business and realizing your entire childhood was built on a lie, especially because it brought me here, working with my real sister to build something that matters." 6 months after that conversation, Ben called me into his office with an expression I couldn't read. "Amy," he said, "I have something to tell you." My stomach sank. After everything we'd been through, I'd learned to associate that tone of voice with bad news. "What's wrong?" Nothing was wrong. But this morning I got a call from Ricardo's lawyer. I sat up hard. Ricardo had been in federal prison for almost 2 years, and we hadn't heard from him since his sentencing. What did he want? Ricardo was dying. Pancreatic cancer. He had about 3 months to live. I wasn't sure how to react to this information. "I'm sorry, Ben. He wants to see me to apologize in person and explain some of the things he couldn't say during his trial." "Are you going to go?" Ben leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know. Part of me thinks he's earned the right to say goodbye to his son, but another part of me thinks that ship already sailed when he decided to use me as a weapon against the only father I've ever had." "What does your gut say?" "My gut tells me I'll regret it if I don't go, and I'll probably regret it if I do." I thought about Dad's letter, about his belief that everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even if they don't deserve forgiveness. "You want me to come with you?" Ben looked surprised. "You'll do that?" Ricardo destroyed our family business and manipulated us both for years. But he's also dying, and he's your biological father. You don't have to face this alone. Amy, you don't owe him anything. I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing this for you. The federal prison was a grim, gray complex surrounded by high fences and guard towers. Ben and I passed through several checkpoints before we were ushered into a small visitor's room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting. When Ricardo was brought in, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident man who spoke at construction industry meetings was gone, replaced by someone who looked decades older and several pounds thinner. An orange prison jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. He sat down across from us, his movements careful and painful. "Ben," he said, his voice. "Thank you for coming." "Amy's here too," Ben said simply. Ricardo looked at me gratefully. "Amy, I know I have no right to ask your forgiveness." "You're right," I said. "You don't, but I need you both to understand something about what I did and why I did it." Ben leaned forward slightly. "We're listening." Ricardo took a shaky breath. "When your mother and I had an affair, it wasn't just physical. I thought I loved her, and I thought she loved me. When she decided to stay with Robert, it destroyed something in me." "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said. "No, it doesn't. But what's worse is that Robert knew about the affair, and yet he chose to raise Ben anyway. He could have exposed me. He could have sought custody. He could have ruined my reputation in the industry. Instead, he simply quietly asked me to leave the company and never associate with your family again." Ben's face was unreadable, and it angered you. I felt erased, like I was so insignificant that Robert could just wave his hand and make me disappear from my own son's life. "So you decided to get revenge," I said. "I decided to prove that Robert Miller wasn't the saint everyone thought he was. I wanted to show that he was just as capable of underhanded tactics as anyone. Besides, he wasn't," Ben said quietly. "Dad never stooped to your level. He just kept trying to build something good, even while you were tearing it down." Ricardo closed his eyes. "I know that now. I spent 2 years here thinking about what I did. And I know I was wrong about Robert. He was a better man than I will ever be." "Why are you telling us this now?" I asked. "Because I want Ben to know that none of this was his fault. I've been manipulating him since he was a teenager, asking random questions about the family business, pretending to be proud of his accomplishments when I was really using his information to sabotage his father." Ben was very quiet, soaking it all up. "And Amy," Ricardo continued, "I want you to know that your father was proud of you. In recent months, when he was starting to realize what I was doing, he told several people that his daughter was the only one smart enough to save the family business." "How do you know that?" "Because some of those people told me. They thought they were sharing gossip about family drama. They had no idea they were describing Robert's strategy for protecting his company from me." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Dad knew I would fight for the business. He was counting on it. He wanted someone strong enough to uncover the truth, and smart enough to use it well. Ben finally spoke. "Ricardo, I need to ask you something. Anything. If you could go back and do it all over again, what would you change?" Ricardo thought for a long time. "I would fight for my rights as your father, openly and honestly, instead of trying to destroy the man who raised you. I would try to build something with you, instead of using you to destroy something. And if Dad said no, if he refused to let you into my life, then I would accept his decision and try to earn his trust back. I wouldn't have spent 4 years proving he was right to keep me away from you." Ben nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me that. I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you could ever forgive me? Not for me, but for yourself." Ben looked at me, then back at Ricardo. "I can forgive you for hurting me," he said carefully, "but I can't forgive you for hurting Dad and Amy. That's something you'll have to live with. I understand, but I also want you to know that I made it. Despite everything you did, or maybe because of it, I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be." Ricardo smiled sadly. "Working with your sister to build something your father would have been proud of." "Something all 3 of our dads would have been proud of," Ben corrected. "Robert Miller, who raised me, our grandfather, who started the company, and you, who taught me, even by accident. Honesty is more important than winning." When we got out of prison, Ben and I drove in silence for several miles. "How do you feel?" I asked finally. "Relieved," he said. "I've been carrying this anger for 2 years, and now I can let it go." "Do you think he was telling the truth about Dad being proud of me?" Ben stopped the car and turned to look at me. "Amy, Dad was always proud of you. even when I was too selfish to see it. Even when I thought I was the favorite, Dad talked about your business acumen, your ability to see the big picture, your determination to fix what was broken. Really? Really? And if you want proof, just look at what we built together. It's exactly what Dad would have wanted. His two kids working together to create something greater than either of us could have done alone. 2 months later, Ricardo Valencia died in the prison hospital. Ben organized a small memorial service, just the two of us. It was strange, sitting in an empty chapel and mourning the man who had done so much damage to our family. But it was also necessary, because no matter what, Ricardo was Ben's biological father, and some connections transcend the pain they cause. At the graveside, Ben placed a single white rose on the coffin. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "I'm thinking about the difference between Dad and Dad," he said. "Ricardo was my dad by biology, but Robert Miller was my dad by choice. And both are important. Yes, they are. But one is more important than the other." As we walked back to the car, Ben pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It was the same photo Dad had taken of me as a baby, with his note about me saving the world. "I carry that with me now," he said. "It reminds me that Dad always knew exactly who we were, even when we didn't know ourselves." "Ben, yes, I think we did it." He smiled. "Yes, Amy, I think we did it." Wilson Miller Industries is now the largest construction company in the tri-state area. We specialize in affordable housing, community development, and infrastructure projects that improve people's lives. Ben handles project management and client relations. I handle finance, strategy, and business development. We never talked about inheritance or who deserves what piece of the company again. We both own exactly 50%, and we both work as hard as we need to continue building something that honors the man who raised us. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if Dad had lived long enough to update his will, or if Ben and I had known the truth about Ricardo from the start. But mostly, I'm grateful the story ended the way it did, because the truth is, Ben was right. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think you want to find everything you really need. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who hurt you the most end up teaching you the most important lessons about who you want to become. Dad always said that building is about creating something that lasts. He didn't mention that the most important thing you can build isn't made of concrete and steel. It's made of trust, forgiveness, and the decision to keep choosing your family every day, even when they disappoint you. Especially when they disappoint you. Ben and I learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it together, and it made everything.